an order from the governor,
Yeah.
your rights are suspended.
Well, my name is Steven Melnik. I live in New York City. I was born in Ukraine, former Soviet Union, and there's a blessing to every curse. So tough life, sometimes we would not have food on the table. My mom was going nuts over it. Was always very stressed out, was always very depressed. My father didn't do too well, very talented guy, and achieved tremendous successes even under that regime at a very young age, but started drinking. He there in that environment, if there's an important meeting, unless you drink, nothing happens. People were used to just drinking every meal and certainly every business meeting, and he just lost control over it, which is very sad. Living there was a complete nightmare because you couldn't say what was in your mind. You were told what to say, what not to say, and if you said something different, if you said something that goes against the government, you end up in prison. I mean, it's just that simple. And the government encouraged people to report on one another. So you were scared to talk to your neighbor because your neighbor will turn you in just to get some, brownie points with the government. So it was a scary situation because you can't talk, you can't say what's on your mind. Everybody knows the whole system is just a mess, but people are scared to say anything. And if you did, again, you end up in prison or you get thrown out you lose your job. I mean, it's just scary. So it's very depressing, and people just lose the agility. And if you can't talk after a while, your brain kind of becomes numb because you just, if you can't talk, if you cannot share your thoughts, then why think? Because it makes it even more difficult and depressing. So it was very difficult, and you couldn't really, from entrepreneurial perspective, that was the biggest joke. I mean, if somebody's missing, there's no food, and you try to bake, for example, and you sell it, that's against the law. Speculation, you get something cheap, you sell high, that's against the law. Government wants to provide everything, and of course, government is completely messed up, completely corrupted. You had to pay off to get into school, you had to pay somebody to get into hospital. It's scary. I mean, the whole conversation about, socialism, it's free healthcare, it's just nonsense. It's just complete nonsense. People would die if they wouldn't have enough money, and you wouldn't have money if you lived and worked and got paid just by government standards. I mean, teachers were getting nothing, doctors were getting nothing. So the only way people would make ends meet, again, if they steal, or if they accept bribes. So the good positions, good jobs would be where can you collect the best, the most bribes. So if you're a doctor, if you're a teacher, if you are, certainly politician, there. And these were the people who would have the most. So you go to these houses for a holiday and they would have things that, by the way, you couldn't buy things, even if you had the money. You couldn't go to the store and buy food, you couldn't buy meat, there are lines for nothing, for a few things they would put once in a while, people would kill each other. I'll never forget, to get shoes. And my mom worked in a big department store, but she would know when they would put out some good shoes for the winter. And there would be a mob of people. And I remember I was like 9 years old, 10 years old, and my mom would be there, I would be there, even though she was working there, but not in that department. And the mob of people would grab boxes. It doesn't matter if it's your size or it's not your size, as long as you grab something, because then you could sell it and you could trade it later. And I remember I ended up grabbing one shoe, right or left, I didn't know, but that was a big victory already. I mean, it was pathetic, it was depressing, it was just absolutely horrible. So I knew there would be no future. Ultimately when Gorbachev came to power, he allowed people some entrepreneurial activities, but again, he opened up the borders, and God bless my mother, she said, we got to get out, and they were about to draft me to Soviet army. So, and also getting out was a pain because, KGB, and I was in a smaller town, somebody leaves the country, it's a big deal. So we knew the rector of the conservatory, and he said, after we applied to leave the country, the government representatives went in and found out, was asking, who is this guy, and is there any problems with him? Because, they don't want people to leave, it looks bad, for the country. So did I do something bad that they could put me in prison and all that? So it was scary. My mom, I was a young guy, I was 17, And my mom would tell me, just, be careful when you cross the street. I mean, it was really scary situations because there are some people who were really mistreated, put into jail when they wanted to leave. Some people, I don't know if you've heard the term, there was a term, refuseniks, people who refused to leave, and they were just mistreated for years and years. So you don't know what you get into, but when everything's so miserable, and when you have absolutely nothing to lose, you're willing to just risk anything and everything just to get out. And that's exactly what we ended up doing. And leaving the country, I mean, it was just crazy because, you have this opportunity to leave, and we got invitations from the relatives that were abroad already. So when you have direct blood, grandparents, my mother's parents, it made it easier to get out. But, we still had to travel to Moscow to get approval. Again, you always carry these boxes of chocolate to give to each person, so they help you get past the next red line, the next red tape and all that stuff. So, but ultimately we got a permission. We couldn't go directly to United States at that time, so we went first through Austria, which was also an interesting time. I mean, it was already amazing situation because, you get to capitalist society and all of a sudden you go to the store and you see food there. You see, all you have to do is just have the money, and I just couldn't believe it, I think I had a banana once or twice in my lifetime, and there I think I was able to bite it a few times before I had to give it to somebody else back in the Soviet Union. It was a big deal, and we weren't. My father achieved tremendous amount of success, and then once he started drinking, we lost everything. I mean, my mom had to get me to my aunt for weekends just to eat. My father, when we left, he was still alive, but we couldn't take him. I mean, we didn't know where we were going, and he was just totally out of it completely. It got really, really bad. I can't even think about it, let alone talk about these things. So, so we left, and I was hoping also while we leave, he's going to be alone, he'll get his act straight. But, he just ended up passing away. He destroyed his entire, system and everything else. So that was rough, and we had to leave quickly. We had an apartment, we couldn't even sell it, there was no time. So everything my mother ever worked for, we just had to leave there, basically. But, you just leave everything just to get out, and she wanted to get me out, from that system. We went through it, and it took us a couple of months, and we ended up in the United States. And that was the happiest moment, of my life, of course, being in a free country and, not having to march like everybody else marches and say the same thing and look at the same direction. So I was crazy excited, and it was a rough time. But I was ready to work 24/7 and do anything and everything that it takes to make it, because I saw the opportunity. I realized I could really do anything I want. And I would sit evening time in Brooklyn and Ocean Park and just dreaming things I could do. And to be honest with you, with all the dreams that I had, I never really dreamed of living the life that I live and creating the life for my family. I mean, it was beyond the wildest imaginations, but as I was growing in the country, my dreams would expand, further and further. My distant relatives placed me in high school. It turned out the worst neighborhood in Brooklyn. People were, there were metal detectors there. People were getting shot. It was quite interesting. And of course, I had to get a job. So, when we just immigrated, I was cleaning bathrooms with my mother. And my mom, of course, needless to say, was quite depressed and was crying because, she didn't know how things would work out. And she was always very worried, what would happen to me, how it would happen to me. But I was very excited to do that because, I saw, this is just a stepping stone, And then I got my job, I got as a waiter in an Italian neighborhood right after that. I was just walking around, because we came from Italy, immigration, we spent, I think, about a month in Italy. So I picked up a few words in Italian. I didn't speak any English. So I thought it was a good idea to work, maybe work in an Italian restaurant. So we walked around, and I walked into this, it's called Cafe Mila Luci, it's no longer there, on 18th Avenue in Bensonhurst. And that was an amazing experience. And they took me into their family, which was tremendous, and I loved it. And I'll never forget, I would work there till 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, being on your feet the whole time, your feet are killing you. And there would be this music, and there's a song I'll never forget. I didn't understand what the song was all about, but I knew there's word, Caruso's song, very famous song, in that neighborhood, and it's still one of my favorite songs. And I remember there were words, Luci, America, I understood the lights of America. And anytime they would play the song, I just couldn't move. I would stand against the wall, and I would want to cry, but from joy that I couldn't believe, like with all this hard work, but I'm waitering, I'm making money, I'm already going to school, and I'm not in that damn place anymore, and I could talk what I think, and nobody's like scared to talk. I was just so overwhelmed with joy, and even though at times I wouldn't feel my body or my feet, I would be like, I'm ready to go, like non-stop. Just bring it on, whatever it takes. I would finish 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, depending on the time, and I would walk home. I would try to save money on the bus, although I'm not even sure buses were running at that time. So I would walk for another half an hour to get home, and of course, by the time I walk home, I can't feel my feet anymore, so I would lay down in the bath, close my eyes, and then at 7 o'clock, I'd have to get up to go to high school. So the trick was to stay awake. But as I said, the high school was in one of the worst neighborhoods in the city. And I was the only kid in class, because I come from former Soviet Union. Teacher walks in, you have to get up, and you have to sit like this and listen. And I would just sit and listen. I didn't know what he was talking about. I don't understand any English. But teachers gave me good grades, because I guess I was the only one who wouldn't threaten to kill them after class and didn't curse them out. So that was kind of my glimpse that, things are, very doable and very possible. I didn't know, what to do. I was asked, what's a good major to make sure I get a job, make money, and people said accounting is a safe bet to go. So I applied, with the accounting major, and as I say, the rest is, so to speak, history. I was sitting in classes with my dictionary, because I didn't understand in college, a lot of things that we're talking about. So I would try to translate, and I would, voice record all the conversations, and I would come home, translate, re-listen. And, I ended up doing well. I graduated as, with the highest GPA, graduating senior. I got an award. I got an offer from every single company I ever applied. I accepted offer from the largest Wall Street firm at that time, consulting and audit firm. Happiness was always a big deal in my life because there was none. It was all misery. It was all screaming, yelling, crying, abuse, on many levels. I was looking for happiness always. This kind of was one of the wake-up calls for me when I realized that to be really happy, to be really successful, you cannot live, you cannot be the way everybody else is. And I've observed the same thing upon coming to this beautiful country, United States, because I do love the country and I appreciate it tremendously. I am everything because of this country. I created the life for my children, for my mother, and able to spread what I know and help others because of this environment. Nothing is perfect, but I wake up every single day, because sometimes I would have dreams that I'm still there, and dealing with all that stuff. And when I wake up, my eyes closed. I'm like, please don't let it be a dream. I just thank God every day when I wake up, knowing that I'm here in the United States, that my children were born here and not there. But I have to admit, everything that I was running away from former Soviet Union, I can't believe that I'm even saying it, but a lot of what I'm seeing now kind of begins to resemble former Soviet Union in the United States, which is scary to me. People are scared to share their thoughts, and those who do end up being penalized. They lose their jobs. And in former Soviet Union, we were told what to say, because you were supposed to say certain things. You were supposed to march in the street and say, God bless Communist Party, and this is our leadership. People were walking around starving, but this is what they were saying. And I see now, one way or another, the government telling people this is how you're supposed to say things. You should never ever hurt anybody. You should never really disrespect anybody. But it's one thing, another thing to say this is how you're supposed to do things. I just spoke with a professor who teaches economics, and specifically Austrian economics, that really the backbone. But interestingly enough, as he was talking about, I said, I'm surprised, how's it going in academia that you're teaching it? And he said, I'm scared to walk out from my room. It's like a landmine, and he's not taken seriously, and he's losing opportunities to publish where he wants to publish. So, and just because he's sharing his information, this reminds me former Soviet Union in a scary way, in a very, very scary way. So if there is no free speech, I lived through it. Everything sounds beautiful in theory, and I love the kids who are walking around and socialism. I lived through it. I lived through it. And socialism very quickly turns into tyranny, because if you don't step along the way, ultimately you're forced, and if you're not forced, you're done. And I've seen this happen. You know, it's all, everything sounds beautiful in theory, and if socialism, if all these general ideas don't sound good to you as a young human being, there's something wrong with you, I think. But in practice, it just simply does not work. And it's misery, it's suffering, it's suppression of free speech, and we're experiencing already this. And this is when, anytime I see this television, radio, like, oh my God, you know, we're back. You know, the country's coming full circle, and it's very sad. It's an amazing country. And it was built on the concept of free speech. And now people, I now talk to academics, I talk to professionals, I talk to politicians, and they're scared. They'll tell me off the record things. And I just can't believe it. This is so sad for me, because this is exactly what my life was in former Soviet Union. And to be honest with you, I'm scared for the future of my children. I brought them, you know, I wanted a better future for them, and they have amazing life, amazing opportunities, but I'm concerned. I don't know if my children will be able to do the same thing. If there's any thought, if there's any comment, I would just say freedom of speech is air. The moment you start pulling it back, the moment you start telling people what they can and cannot say, but you should be able to say what's on your mind. And this is fundamental. If this is gone, the country is gone, society is gone, we're all gone, and this is the beginning of and the end of society as we know it.
We've seen a lot of folks who are saying they're not doing that. They're here, they're on the Capitol steps, staging a more traditional protest here in front of the Capitol building in Lansing.